introduce you a professor from Monash University, Suku Bhaskaran. And today our meeting is connected with very interesting topic, gender-based wage disparity in India. Workplace phenomenon or social-cultural economic phenomenon. The theme is really very important for us because we even have a group of teachers in our university who are working a lot of articles about the situation of wage disparity in Russia. So for us, it will be really interesting to listen how it happened in India. So please, Suko, you can tell us about your investigations in India.
I'm going to adopt a structured approach to the discussion so that I keep to the time and you follow the train of thoughts I have, because with things like this, often we tend to lose the train of thought if there is no structure. So what I would articulate is, I will articulate a very conventional research dissemination paradigm that's typically used if you write a journal article or you write a PhD or whatever. You start with a research question. In this case, I will be articulating 5 questions. I put it in the form of a question itself, and each are linked to the other. So I start off by asking, what is it? 5 things that we need to find out, that we aim to find out in the study. And all through the process, what I'm doing is, I am trying to justify the need for this research. So these are the 5 questions that I would hopefully address in today's discussion. Is gender-based wage disparity pervasive in India? It's inevitable that there would be gender-based differences, but is it widespread in the organizations that we have? So we are more interested in seeing whether it's widespread. Regrettably, what we have done is, we have looked at one subsector of industry, which is the IT industry, and then we are trying to extrapolate and talk about other sectors. And there is several limitations in doing this, and we'll discuss that. Now, the second thing we are addressing is primarily my work. My PhD scholars, one was involved in this together with me. So when I say we, I mean 2 of us. So if we say that gender wage disparity is pervasive, if it is widespread, we are trying to explore what contributes to this. Why is there, in this day and age, discrimination in the wages paid to males and females? Is this an inequitable practice, or are there other reasons? And more generally, the third thing we are looking at is, more generally, in terms of workplace inequity or lack of fairness faced by women in India, how does this compare with inequity faced by women in developed countries? Why developed countries? Because we have reviewed about 80 to 100 articles as part of the process of informing our own research. And most of them came out of, partially because of the language issues, most of them came out of the Anglophile countries, countries such as the United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, and all of that. So we are trying to look at how does wage disparity between males and females in our country, or the reasons that contribute to this, how does it compare with Western, within inverted comma, developed countries as compared to India? The fourth question we want to address is, how can the wage disparity and other workplace inequities faced by women be addressed? What should we do to correct this inequity? And finally, most important from a theoretical perspective, can the findings of this study be generalized to develop theory and support practice and public policy and other things? Can it be generalized? Because we are looking at one sector, can this be extended to cover the whole country and other sectors? So generalization becomes very important. Just because the audience are predominantly, you are from Russia, so I looked at some data. Actually, your figures are very, very good. The wages of females as a whole across all sectors, and as Professor Linodova said just now, there is this practice of women being in certain occupations and not in all occupations, and that might explain this. Notwithstanding that, on the average, women get paid 66% of the total salary that a male gets. And that compares with countries such as the USA, Australia, and even China. It's all 66%. But in India, it's a totally different picture. If you take average wages, women get paid only 28% of the gross earnings of men. But that is a bit of a misnomer, because there is many things that explain this. And the most important thing is, in the Indian context particularly, there is a high degree of women being highly represented in some sectors because of their personal decisions. And therefore, it's not a real representative indicator as to what the ratio of salary they get compared to men on an average. Averages are always misleading. And therefore, our suggestion was, how do we increase women's participation in higher paying jobs in India? So that is, I'll trust it. I will not show this because I thought, just to contextualize things, I would do a comparison between Russia and India, but that's not needed for this. I'll skip it because of the paucity of time as well. As those of you who have got a focus on India, you realize that we are a low-income country hoping to go on to the position of a middle-income country. And Russia is already at a very advanced stage of being a middle-income country, and its aspirations are to be a high-income country. So there is some contrast between the two contexts that we're talking about. In a lot of indicators, sadly, as a researcher, or I consider myself a scholar, as we all are, I tend not to be nationalistic in what I'm reviewing. People sometimes tend to have a nationalistic approach, so I do not. I think in India, we need to adopt a much more inclusive approach, because as the indicators I've shown here under in the PowerPoint, I'll talk to them very quickly. We have a lot of things to be done because we have to use diversity and all resources we have to climb up the ladder as a country where the income levels are more equitable. And because women constitute 50% of our population, without their equitable and fair involvement in the work we do, we cannot reach anywhere. So much more than Russia or the USA or the UK. For India, this is an urgent thing. We are not making full use of 50% of our population very effectively. We've got a humongous population. We're the second most populous country in the world. Our economic development, we are still, notwithstanding the high percentage increases in the gross domestic product, we are still a very low income country. In world ranking, we are 129 in terms of income, and our nominal per capita GDP is only about United States 2,104. We have got a very inequitable distribution of income. The Gini index is 37.8, and we are ranked 95 in the world in terms of how equitable the income is. So there's a high level of income disparity in India, and in inequitability in income, not only with females, but generally as a population. Our world competition position is only 68. Our hunger index, we rank 103. I was shocked about this. And our global health position, we are ranked 57. So we've got humongous problems and we've got to address this. And added to this is the fact that our aspirations are high and we've got to quickly address this. And therefore, this idea of creating greater gender equity in the workplace is very, very important because of the unique position our country is in. Often, especially the Western scholars or some Western scholars and Indian politicians certainly, we say that India's biggest advantage, it's its human capital. It is often touted as the demographic dividend that India would derive as the population in China ages. It is already aged. They are now going on a 3-child policy in China. And the populations in Western countries, and even Russia recently, Mr. Putin had said that he wants to also encourage people to have more children. As the population in these countries age, it will benefit India because India has got a young population. But my argument is that having a young population is not of much use if the health and well-being of the population is not good, if the level of training, education, etc. is not good, and if we are unable to retain our ambitious and well-trained people from going abroad, and therefore we lose our best people to some other countries as well. Therefore, we are facing significant challenges, and we cannot afford not to adopt a more inclusive policy and develop and give greater opportunities to that 50% of the population who contribute a lot to us. Therefore, this is a very, very important reason why greater equity in the workplace, gender equity in the workplace is important to India. And I would think it's much more important to India than other countries who are slightly ahead of us. Now, in terms of per capita nominal gross national income, ours is only $2,104. However, this is higher than most other poor countries, almost all other poor countries. So in regard to the lower income countries, we do quite well in per capita gross national income. However, as I said earlier, the distribution of the income is not very good. And this is not because of gender alone, but because of various other reasons. So at 37.8 Gini index, we are perhaps one of the most inequitable countries in the world in terms of wage differences. There is a very high disparity between the haves and the have-nots. All this despite us having what you would describe as a workforce equality index. And this is a UN thing, workforce equality index. We score 62.6. We are vastly above other low-income countries, and we are also close to some of the developed countries and middle-income countries with our workforce equality index. So just on this measure, it is said that our workplaces are highly equitable to women. 62.6 is a very high level. Yet, we are still a low-income country. The income distribution is bad, and there is very low participation by women in the workforce. We have only got a 21% participation. And sadly, the participation rate of women in our workforce, and this is individuals above 15 years and over, and that's how it's computed globally, has seen a continuous tracking down, both for males and females, but much more accentuated when it comes to females. So in 1955, we had a women participation rate of 24%. By 2019, this has gone down to 21%. So rather than all the measures that we are doing, policy and economic restructuring that we are doing, it does not seem to have paid dividends because less and less women are participating in the workforce. Therefore, we are not accessing an important component of the population to help us drive growth, development, and a fairer society. The main cause for this is this bifurcation in terms of an informal and a formal sector. And the informal sector in India and in much of South Asia, including Pakistan, Bangladesh, places like that, the informal sector is extremely important, but the informal sector is the one that pays generally less favorable salaries, and therefore this accounts for one of the main reasons why there is such high income disparity, not only in terms of women being in certain occupations, but also working in the non-formal sector. Men, 51%, and women, particularly greater, 70% are in the informal sector in India. And these are small farms, petty shops, working as maids, etc. And therefore, this is the main reason why the gender inequity in the society is high. But one of the positives of this would be that India's per capita GNI, gross national income, may have been understated or is being understated because we do not capture the data from this informal sector. Am I going right with everyone? Is it fine? You follow the thread of my argument so far?
Yes.
Okay, now, so maybe grossly understated. So for example, if you take a maid, and most Indians have got maids, unfortunately. I was born and brought up abroad before I moved to India. And to me, having a maid is a luxury. But in India, most people have maids. And if you look at a maid, they pay a salary in cash. She would probably work in your house for 4 or 5 hours. She would hop on to another house, work for another 4 or 5 hours. And therefore, she would be earning a reasonable salary from 3 or 4 houses where she works as a maid, someone works as a cleaner, etc., etc. And this is not captured in the data. So strictly, the income levels that we are drawing could be a bit misleading, but I just thought I will indicate that. And this graph here shows the sectors in which women are most pervasive. As you can see, they are largely in the agricultural sector. By agricultural sector, I mean people who are daily wage, unskilled people who are working in those areas. And therefore, that accounts for part of the low incomes that women earn. Therefore, this idea of computing average wages, I'm comprehensively opposed to that, notwithstanding the fact that many multilateral agencies compute average wages by aggregating salaries in different areas. And the improvement in the salaries is inevitable in India as more women, as the graph shows, get into service industries and construction industries beyond being just casual labor, and as they begin to ladder up in job roles, as they start to be supervisors, managers, directors, etc. This is the inevitable thing. And what we propose in this research is that that's happening in India. Therefore, we looked at only one sector in this industry, and our central thesis in doing this is that this sector, the characteristics of this sector will replicate the Indian work environment increasingly as the formal sector becomes more important, and that is inevitable in India. The informal sector will decrease in importance because India is still a very rural country with about 30% only being in urban areas compared to Russia. I think about 80 to 90% of the people live in urban areas. And most developed countries worldwide, yes, 80 to 90% of people live in urban areas. So we are still a very rural country, and that would change as urbanization is tracking up, as new avenues for work is coming up, and therefore there could be some level of self-correction in the the wage disparity between the genders. We undertook a very extensive review of literature, both reports by multilateral agencies, but even more so scholarly works by others who are working in this area in India and abroad. So this helped us get a perspective of what the position is in the developed countries, and also helped us identify how things such as a wage, position hierarchy, employer benefits have got to be defined, because the terminology itself means nothing. You can call someone a supervisor, but if the person does not fulfill a supervisory role, the job title means nothing, and therefore it could be deceptive when you compare one country's performance with another. And what does wage encompass? Does it encompass benefits? Does it, such as housing? Does it encompass a car, traveling? Does it include employees' provident fund, etc.? So we went to some level of depth here in saying that, again, when you want to compare wages in India with that of another country, you should have some basis of defining what is wage. So we have included salary plus benefits as being the wage, and we have then looked at works by scholars who have used the same definition, so that we are comparing equals. Now, so what we found out from this critical literature review, the critical literature review was extremely important for us to establish what is the current level of knowledge on this topic worldwide. And we delineated this into 6 areas and a few sub-areas. And this is quite a novel contribution, in my opinion. So what the studies abroad, the developed West, tells us is that the cause for disparity in male-female incomes, and as I said earlier, remember that the male-female disparity in income in the developed West, such as Australia, is far less than in India. In Australia, the females earn about 68% on an average compared to males. And USA, it's still 66%. In Russia, it's 66%. And in China, it's 66%. And we are here talking in India of only 28%. So they are saying that largely they attribute this to occupational segregation and job roles. What do women do? So in some of these countries, there will be production line workers, there will be nurses, there will be teachers, etc. They are lower paying jobs. They attribute partially to employer attitudes and practices. They employ partially to public policy. They attribute this partly to collective bargaining, union actions, and the actions by advocacy groups. Because in the West, of course, the women are much more assertive, and they bargain or negotiate for better salary. And the physiological and personal traits. There are women, because they argue that because of their physique and other capabilities, they would not fit into certain jobs, and that too perhaps explains why women draw lower salaries on an average. And this, I keep repeating this, on an average. And to me, on an average is not a good measure of checking whether there's true disparity. And then, strangely, they come up with social, economic, and cultural factors, which is the title of my presentation today. And this includes their choices in terms of work-life balances, their fit for jobs because of their education, in terms of the discipline they undertook and the level of education, and their capacity to undertake professional development. Their roles as women in terms of parenting and family responsibilities, their immobility to move from one part of the country to another part of the country or to another organization to take up a more senior role because of family and other commitments. And generally men, they say, do not have that. And generally in the environment, it is seen that they are the secondary income earners. The family runs primarily from the salary. The husband or the spouse or the partner is the main income earner, and the female partner or spouse is the secondary income, supplements the household income. And then personal and professional lifestyle. And at various stages in their life, either to have a family or to look after their children and other things, they tend to decide to move out of the work environment and concentrate on family and other matters and come back to work later, which means they lose several years in between. And also they come back on a part-time basis. And this contributes to the disparity in wages. So to summarize this, occupational segregation, employer attitudes and practices, public policy, collective bargaining and actions by advocacy group, physiological and personal traits, and social, economic, and cultural factors have been attributed in that order as being the contributory factors to the disparity in wages earned by women compared to men. I will go on and say something else, but here I would like to tell you that, because this is not a detective novel, it's a research project. I'll tell you that in the Indian context, 6 is the most important, because of challenges in terms of gender roles, parenting and family particularly, takes a very big reason why there is disparity in the income of women in the formal sector as compared to men. That is because the family unit is extremely important in the Indian context, number one. And number two, unlike what is typically a family unit in the West, an Indian family unit does not comprise the partners, the husband or partner and wife and children. It also includes in-laws quite frequently, because we have got this concept of the extended family. So effectively, the female takes care of an extended family. This is slightly different in some parts of India, such as Kerala and the northeast states, like Assam and places like that. There is a bit more equity, but broadly in India, there is high levels of inequity. It's a highly paternalistic society. It's a society which is male-dominated, barring a few communities within the country. So how did we conduct our research? We delimited our study to mid to senior level executives because we wanted to have some level of homogeneity in the group of people, because what job roles do they do, and is there in this job role, is there discriminatory practice between males and females? So we wanted to do that. Therefore, we say that the mid to senior level executives in the IT industry is good because we see a high level of women participation in the IT industries in urban areas. And that is a formal sector. And as I said, as India becomes more urbanized, and as the formal sector becomes more important, it is likely that the employment terms, conditions, and workplace practices would replicate those of the IT sector. And I think that is happening. That's happening in the banking, insurance, hospitality, and such sectors, which are where there is higher level of women participation, and which is the formal sector. Who did we interview? We decided to interview because it's the one sector of the industry, and we are based in Gurgaon, which is one of the townships close to Delhi, and there is a high level of IT companies here. We decided to access women working in mid to senior level managerial roles. In the IT industry, as educators, as consultants, as working in the banking and finance sector, etc. So we looked at these areas largely. The formal sector, and we looked at mid to senior level executives, we only interviewed them. We adopted a snowball sampling technique, and this is a very simple technique that's quite often used in studies like this. The literature review showed that and works quite well. What we do is we approach one person through a contact network, and we ask them to refer us to other people who are in a similar job role as them. And then we speak to these people. We ask them to talk about, is there gender equity in their workplace? What do they do? What are the factors that contribute to the gender equity? What do they understand by gender equity? And we conducted a very in-depth face-to-face interview with 14 women. As you would know, in snowball sampling, we stop when we see that there is theoretical saturation. After interviewing a number of people, we are getting the same answers, therefore it's no point going any further. That's an entire premise on which snowball sampling is based. And quite often with snowball sampling, people stop at 5 to 6 interviews, but we said we will extend it to 14 and also incorporate 2 males just to get an overview. So that's what we did. This can be challenged, but overall, it's a fairly rigorous technique. We did a very good, we undertook very good in-depth interviews. We created a good research instrument. We pre-tested the research instrument. We looked at the scales, etc. And overall, the knowledge that we generated through this interview process was very, very good. So as I said earlier, now confining ourselves to women in mid to senior level executives, largely in the service industry, would that enable us to generalize the findings? Is this applicable to Indian women as a whole? Our argument is that yes, it is. It is perhaps the best way you can get information that can be generalizable, because the formal sector is becoming more important. There's high growth level in urbanization, and more women, if they've got nursery education and training, are moving from low-paying informal sectors to higher-paying occupations in the formal sector. So without doing much, there will be a national progression towards there being less disparity in the wages earned. But therefore, delimiting the study to one sector and only to mid to senior level executive hierarchies does not reduce the scope to generalize the study findings and support theory building. That's our take on this. Now, this is a criticism I spoke to earlier. Many studies, particularly those by multilateral agencies like the International Labour Organizations, World Bank, etc., and various think tanks, all these studies has been at the aggregate level, comparing mean or median wages without forethought to position hierarchy and job roles, wage differences across industries and industry sectors. And they are further, in our review of the literature, they are circumspect. They are not very clear about wages in the informal sector, agricultural laborers, construction workers, large number of women who work as maids or cleaners, and that too concurrently at several workplaces. And what would be surprising to some of you would be, as it was surprising to me, I said we are a country with a very high population. Despite that, we got migrant workforce, particularly women, especially guest workers from Nepal, because they do not need a visa. So there are a lot of women working at as cleaners and construction workers and maids from Nepal. And to some, because Nepalis do not need a visa to come to India and work here. And also from Bangladesh, where we have a lot of restrictions, but notwithstanding that, we've got a porous border. And this takes place quite extensively. I can tell you personally, from my personal experience, we've got 6 people working in my house for various reasons. Because my mother is a very chronic ill, she's 90 odd years. We've got 2 nurses who come on shifts. We've got a maid and a cleaner. All these luxuries I never had prior to coming to India 10 to 12 years ago. But all 6 of them, surprisingly, are from Bangladesh. And because they work and they're here because it's not being tracked very well. So what is the first finding? And let's talk about that first finding that we've got. First finding, not related to the research topic, is, by the way, what we found out was there is comprehensive, in my opinion, understatement per capita income and GDP. So India has in effect got a higher per capita income and GDP than what is captured in the statistics. Oh yes, we will still be a very poor country. We are still a low income country, but actually our per capita income is far higher than what is captured, because this large number of people who are working in the informal sectors, whose incomes have not been appropriately aggregated in developing total income comparisons. Now, the biggest weakness that I see in the Indian system is the social indicators, and I've already alluded to that, to health, education, etc. And this is the area where we need to address things so that we go on a higher trajectory of equity between males and females, and also equity between different groups of people that live in the country. India's formal service sector companies, enterprises in urban areas, in domains such as information technology, education, consultancy services, banking and insurance, and hospitality, adopt world-best HR practices. I'm not saying that they're equivalent to, but they adopt. There's some level of, because of the nature of the environment, there's some reduction of this, but they do not have any gender-based wage discrimination and inequity. These newer companies in these formal sectors. The concept of equal pay for equal work is very pervasive within these industries. However, this is the interesting bit. The concept of equal pay for equal work is pervasive. However, there is income disparity and a glass ceiling effect. Right? We're talking about women in mid to senior level, but not at the director level and the senior management level. It is hard for women to progress into these positions, and that is largely not because of the employers, and I will talk about that a little bit later, but because of socio-economic inequities, because of what our society, how it is structured, because of the high paternalistic approach to things. There are inequities that happen at home, and this affects women's career progression and participation in more senior roles. Therefore, I'm saying whatever inequities and disparities that the women experience in the formal sectors in India is an outcome of socio-cultural reasons rather than inequities in the workplace. So even the workplace can provide certain support mechanisms, and I'll talk to that next. So we put in these empirical data into en vivo, and we develop certain thematic clusters. The first thing that we identified was largely there was a lack of support mechanism and empathy in the workplace for women-friendly or family-friendly support. They do not discriminate them, but they do not recognize that there is gender difference, and therefore women have got to be treated slightly differently and given certain support because they have got this significant family role at home, and that is an outcome of our culture and behaviors and not because of them, and therefore there has got to be some adjustment for this. The other thing is we feature very well in terms of the rules and regulations, as I said, and the equality index, we got about 68%, we are good. But it's one thing to have rules, but another thing to enforce those rules. And I think the government needs to play a more active role in introducing affirmative actions. because of entrenched disadvantages that women experience in a preeminently paternalistic society, male-dominated society, there has got to be more aggressive affirmative actions for greater representation of women in non-traditional programs of study. They've got to encourage more women to take up roles that are dominated by men. And to get those roles, they also have to look at the education system to encourage women to get into programs that they traditionally do not pursue. I spent a large part of my life in Australia, for example, and I used to run a research center there. When we have an interview, it's compulsory and it's union mandated that the selection panel should at least have 2 female representatives. We do not have rules like that. So what I'm saying is we must start to enforce these sort of rules. Strangely, as the president, I get involved in a lot of interviews at senior levels. And I was shocked when I first started here that the interview panel starts to ask the lady the question such as, would you be getting married soon? So after the interview, I told my colleagues, how can you ever ask a question like that? What has that got to do with the capability to do the job? No, if they are getting married soon, the husband might be transferred somewhere else and they leave the job. I said, but you can't ask this sort of questions because this is gender inequity. So they don't even realize that our recruitment processes, there are certain limitations, and this has got to be addressed. So not only has it got to be addressed by affirmative action, but I'm saying that the government has got to incentivize employers to say that, look, yes, ladies will go off on maternity leave, so now we've got parenting leave for men as well, but largely they go on maternity leave. They might take time off to be with their family. Therefore, you must create an ecosystem where they can work from home, where there is a crash facility, where there are other support mechanisms so that we retain women and give them opportunity to progress into higher level jobs. Physiological and personal traits, which strangely was an important characteristic in the Western research, is not at all a discriminatory practice. So notwithstanding us being a highly paternalistic society, there is really a lot of respect and there is little discrimination in the workplace just because you are of a different gender. So I'm summarizing the findings. The principal reasons, and I call this, of literature says, it's a glass ceiling effect. You can't go beyond certain level. You fly, you hit the ceiling, then you know you can only fly that high. The main reasons why women, if there is some level of inequity, is because of childbearing and family responsibilities. And I keep repeating this. India is a paternalistic society and traditionally a joint family environment. Therefore, the women have also got to take care of her in-laws and other things. So it's a bit different in that way. Now, then women tend to have a much narrower career perspectives because of, number one, childbearing family responsibilities, plus the kind of education they undertake, plus their inability to participate in training and other things to progress to a higher level, because the family takes precedence over the work environment, and the inability to continue in employment. I've had some very good colleagues who are bright young women. Number one, first of all, they came back to India from overseas because the husband wasn't doing so well, and therefore he decided to come back to India. But the woman was probably doing very well abroad, but just because she has to follow the husband, it means giving up her job and coming here and working in. So the sacrifice happens in that way. And therefore the continuity in employment, lots of people, several of the interviewees that we had, they say that because of the work demands, the long hours of work, plus the demands in the household, not from the employer, but at the household level, because of that, what happens is sometimes they decide to give up the job after some time, saying that once children are a bit older, I will come back to work, or I will take on a part-time position. Therefore, this is a disadvantage, not because of the difficulties in the workplace, but because of the kind of our family structure. And we have to do something about this very, very seriously. Yeah. Then immobility in choice of workplaces. Inevitably, when you get a promotion, you might need to move from Gurgaon to Bangalore or to some other city, and women are most often not able to do that or even go overseas, unless the husband too gets a job there. And therefore, this is a big disadvantage in terms of their upward mobility and breaking out of this glass ceiling effect. Where the employers fail is them not providing support mechanism at the workplace. Like I said, crash facilities, work from home, and other mechanisms in the workplace, which would help them retain these very good women who can be promoted to a senior level. And of course, as far as the government goes, I believe this, or at least what we found out in the study, was that there's insufficient enforcement of affirmative action. They do not seriously say you must do this. Or if you do that, there will be disadvantages for the employer, especially a private sector employer. It might cost you more. Therefore, you must provide some level of incentives to these people to correct this. If you look at a country like Australia, where very many, there are high levels of incentivization for women to pursue certain types of studies. They give preferences to women. Or in the job environment too, they say that there must be much more equitable, just based on gender, race, and other things. And that does not exist in India, unfortunately. And I have been privy to how well affirmative actions work if the government takes a very strong stand on this. Because again, I was born in Malaysia and I lived there until my undergraduate studies. I spent in Malaysia. They have a very strong race-based affirmative action. The indigenous people, the Malays, are accorded affirmative, have been accorded affirmative programs in terms of employment and other facilities. And what has happened is that this has become a social engineering activity where now, whereas the indigenous Malays were predominantly working as farmers in the villages, now we've got a large segment of these people working at senior corporate, not them, but their children and others, because of these affirmative programs have come up to be professionals, to be executives, to be doing well in subject areas which they traditionally did not appeal to them. Therefore, I believe in countries such as this, such as ours, which is in the trajectory of slow growth, but rapid growth, but slowly, there has got to be much more greater enforcement of affirmative action, number one, and number two, incentivization. You've got to provide some level of incentives for employers to recruit more females into senior positions. Now, to answer the 5 questions that I started the discussion with, because that was the objective of the study. Is gender-based wage discrimination pervasive in India? You can say very affirmatively that no, not at all at mid to senior executive levels. Number 2, if gender-based discrimination is pervasive, what contributes to this? And I said the only place where it exists, the glass ceiling effect in not being able to progress up. Now, here the main reason, as I already articulated, is because of socio-cultural reasons and public policy inactivity. The government has got to play a much stronger role in this. How does, more generally, workplace inequity faced by women in India compare with those in the developed countries, which is the source of much of the literature that we have got? Our conclusion is that inequity does not exist in mid to senior executive positions in the formal sector. Remember, we interviewed women to get this information, and they do not feel that there is inequity. Seems that inequity in the workplace is more pervasive in the developed West. our reading of the literature suggests that actually it is much more pervasive at the workplace, is much more pervasive in the developed West, and not in a country like India. Here, the inequity stems from household reasons, the family or high level of family orientation and demands from the family, where they are inevitably relegated to the role of the secondary contributor to the family income. The maid inevitably is the primary contributor to the family income. That mentality has got to change. And therefore, that is the main contributor. And also, the government not playing a more serious role in affirmative actions. Because India has got far too many other problems, so they do not look at this. How can wage disparity and other workplace inequities faced by women be addressed? I think there has got to be greater government intervention. Programs to change socio-cultural attitudes and behavior. This has got to be done. That people's mentality that the women or a female child is less important than a male child has got to change. And at the highest of levels, the educated elites in India, this idea is pervasive and gradually is, fortunately, it is dying down. They want a male child as opposed to a female child. And that is changing in urban India. But urban India is a very small sector. That's changing among people who are in the higher socio-economic ladder and income ladder. So this has got to expand much more broadly. Can the findings of the study be generalized? Yes, definitely can be generalized because, as I said earlier, the formal sectors and non-traditional job roles are becoming more important, and with this, there will be a natural replication of practices that are more women and family friendly. But that will be naturally happen, but it will be too slow. And I think there's got to be greater interventions by the government to incentivize and also to enforce rules in terms of recruitment of women. And there'll be more women representation in various areas, number one. And number two, educating the family to say that women are important. So what are the conclusions that we can draw from this? The main cause for gender wage disparity in India are the cultural beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. We need to promote this at the societal level. We've got to educate families that I've got students who have whom I'm supervising to do the PhD. Their completion date for the PhD is driven by the fact that, sir, in August, I'm getting married. Therefore, I've got to complete my PhD before I get married. I said, that's a very strange benchmark to use to complete a PhD. And I've not heard this anywhere else. And people are driven by this imperative. And Indian women, because of the family, marriage is high in priority. And therefore, the work and the education becomes lower in priority, and that has got to change. So, weak gender-oriented affirmative actions, lack of women and family-friendly support facilities in the workplace, and government inaction to enforce regulations on gender equity and provide incentive to employers to encourage the adoption of affirmative actions also contribute to gender inequity in India's workplaces. And I believe in this very strongly. I believe public policy that are being enforced and the provision of incentives to employers would contribute quite substantially because that is something we can manage. To change family attitudes is much more a longer period, though we should work towards that. Greater workforce participation by women, particularly in non-traditional job roles, will accelerate India's progress towards becoming a middle-income economy. Otherwise, we're stuck. I read in the 1970s, that's how old I am, in the 70s, the famous Time magazine in the United States had a cover page with a tortoise and a hare. They said that the tortoise is India and the hare, the rabbit, is China. It will run very quickly now, but ultimately the tortoise will win the race. But 30 years later, I still don't see the tortoise win the race, whereas the hare has gone very much further. And I think lots of this has got to do with family practices and our lack of enforcement, because we are ultimately driven by to support policies that helps parties retain their position, come back to power. And therefore, the gender equity has taken a backseat, and it should not. If we are to progress, we have to accelerate greater women participation in the workplace. And therefore, I would say that there's got to be a strong role from the government, because educating families is a long-term process. With that, I'll end there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's really very interesting. But I was listening really very attentively, and I understand your hopes that something will happen if the government will be more progressive concerning the family policy. But I can say about the Russian experience in this field. You see, in Russia, women received equal rights after the October Revolution. So, first of all, it was proclaimed that women have equal rights with men, and such has happened that we received equal rights to participate in industrialization of the country, and we had equal rights to receive to get good education, and it was proclaimed that we have equal rights with men and a lot of possibilities. But what we have in result after the disappearance of Soviet Union, and how it happened in Russia now, our government now proclaimed that the best position for women is a family, first of all. And we have a hard problem to approve a law concerning the aggressive against aggressive men in a family. So we had equal rights to get job, but we did not have equal rights in family. What I'm talking about? The problem is that from my point of view, government should begin with the special policy in the family concerning the position of women in family, first of all, because it's normal when a woman being a mother and getting less salary than her husband have to leave her job and going somewhere with her husband because the loss for the family much more less. And from my point of view, the problem is is first of all in the position women in the family, first of all. So from my point of view, that the government, Indian government, first of all should think how to change the position of women in family first, because education, new job possibilities in new in in new non-traditional jobs, it's very good, but that is not the decision for solving the problem. What do you think? You compare with China, but we also were the state for a long time without religion. And from my point of view, the problem of disparity of wage is still is an agenda in Russia. From my point of view, the tradition, to do something with the tradition, this is the first aim for the government. What do you think, Suku?
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and that was my thesis as far as India goes as well. You have to change our traditional socio-cultural practices, but that's going to take a very long time. And
why do you think it will take very long time?
Because it is a personal choice. The families, I do not know whether you've got an extended family in Russia, but certainly in India, it's an extended family. It's more than your husband and kids. It's your in-laws and everybody else. Therefore, that the problem exists, number one. Number two is that the data suggests that countries such as Russia and China have actually done quite well, because the female to male salary ratio in Russia, in China, in the United States, and in Australia is anywhere from 66 to 68%. It's still low, but at least something. But people like us, we cannot afford this luxury, because the difference between male to female salaries in India, women only earn overall 28% of the salary of men. So we have got a much bigger gap, number one, and we've got a humongous population. Yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly that culture is an important thing that has got to be changed. People's mindset has got to be changed. And I can give you very anecdotal evidence. Okay, we have lunch in the office. I go and sit down for my lunch, and there is some dish that's very good, and they know that it's one of my favorite. And I've forgotten to take that as I was coming to get my meal. And somebody looks at my plate and says, "Sir," a lady particularly, ladies particularly, they say, "Sir, you haven't taken this dish. I know that it's your favorite, but you haven't taken this. Why is that?" I say, "Oh, I did not see it." They jump up, want to go and get it for me. I said, "Please don't do this. Please don't do this, because I don't believe in hierarchies, nor in gender differences. And if you do this for me, when I get home, I will have this habit." And my wife was not Indian born, and she's not going to about to go and get me the dish. So please let me not practice certain behaviors in the workplace so that I have difficulties when I get home. Because I've got a very balanced family. I mean, we are equals. And I believe that in most societies worldwide, this is happening. As you develop the strengths, well, the concept of, I'm not saying it should be that, but the concept of marriage, for example, in the West, places like Australia, particularly UK or US, is not very strong. India, sometimes the whole life is driven by this idea of, especially women, to get them married as quickly as possible. So that cultural change would be quite a challenge, I believe, but it has got to be done as well. It's got to be done. We've got to concurrently educating the society that there should not be discriminatory practices in the house with regards to the male child and the female child, between the husband and the wife, etc., etc. But I believe that society like India, and I've seen this happen, as I said, in countries like Malaysia and Australia, this place where I worked, that affirmative actions, in this case, not necessarily, in the case of Australia, it was affirmative action in favor of the women, but in the case of Malaysia, it was affirmative action about people who did not have an equal chance in society, had paid substantial dividends. And I'm not saying that you should force people, but you should enforce existing regulations to start with, number one. Number two, you can provide incentives. And the modern workplace is such, especially the formal sector, other than if you are in a construction worker or a farm worker. Otherwise, there are lots of opportunities to work from home. So you can create a family-friendly culture so that it ties in with women, not when they're entering the job, but as they progress up, the chances of them being retained with all these skills that we have developed for them, being retained is greater if you create a more family-friendly environment. That's my thought. Anyway, research is always can be looked at from different perspectives, but my own belief is that, and besides this research, having witnessed such things in a number of countries where I've worked, I think that works quite well, that the societies have evolved in a different way. But notwithstanding that, even in those countries, there is wage disparity. Like I said, Russia, for example, or China, or the United States, women on the whole only earn 66% of men's salary, and that's the highest in the world, barring countries such as Sweden and other places. But India, we can't afford this luxury. The women are only earning 28% of the wages of men.
I agree with you that it is really very hard in the society when the women earn 20% of normal man wage. It's really very difficult to get equal rights with men. But I can only say that about 20 years ago, I was working at the American University, and at first I was shocked by behavior of American women when they refused to take care from their husbands, and they, from my point of view, rather aggressively demand equal wage and rights. But 20 years passed, and I look at my daughter. She's from more traditional society, in more traditional family, but she now new generation, and now she's earning 4 times more than her boyfriend. And she's saying, Mom, I don't want to marry him. I don't need husband as we used to have. So it's better to have a visiting marriage. I'm not going to take care about him.
Yeah, yeah.
If he don't want to think about, if he does not want to think about a career, and if you're so crazy to have grandchildren, I say, I will give you grandchildren, but I'm not promising you I will have a husband. Can you imagine? Only one generation. So maybe in India, the situation will change more quickly than we used to think. The world is changing really quickly.
I hope it does, certainly from our sake.
Maybe somebody would like to ask a question to our guest. Hello. So,
Hello, everyone.
hello, everyone.
Hello. Can you see me?
I could, but not anymore.
Sorry. 1 second. Okay. Now?
Yes,
Yes.
now we're.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Anaid. And if you allow me, I would like to ask you about your topic, Mr. Bhaskaran. As well as I'm very interested in Indian soft power policy, my PhD thesis is dedicated to that topic. I would like to say that the topic you have discussed today is very important because this problem really beats on Indian image globally. And this topic also proves that lots of problems comes with mentality and culture. And I would like to ask you about what do you think about the idea of one of my favorite Indian politicians and academics, Shashi Tharoor, who once tweeted that he supports the idea of payment of housekeepers. I even found the tweet where he wrote that monetize the services of women homemakers in society, enhance their power and autonomy, and create near universal basic income. He said that it will lead to the awareness in the society to understand the value of unpaid work, housekeepers. What do you think about this idea?
I think it's being advocated in many countries, actually. It's not a noble idea from Shashi Tharoor.
Yeah.
So it is being advocated. And not only, they say that the work that the female in the family, the wife, does, there has got to be a component of salary and that has got to be weighted. But in a country like India, it's even worse than that, I think, because as I said, there are so many people working within a family. Before coming to India 12 years ago, I'm of Indian ancestry, but was not born here. And until the last 12 years, I've not worked in India, nor studied in India. So when I first came, it was all a very shock to me because there's this high level of not only the family, how it operates, but also in terms of the role responsibilities of all these people like maids and cleaners and others like that. Because we have some parts of the people are stuck in a maybe 100 years from now. The other experience, if I can share my own experience, was somebody wanted to come and meet me in the office. This was about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And my secretary came to me and said, this guy wants an appointment with you. I said, have you found out what he wants to see me about? And she said, this is the reason he wants to see me about. I said, look, that has got nothing to do with me. Why don't you ask him to go and meet Mr. So-and-so, because that is what he handles, and I do not handle this. No, he wants to meet with you. And this is a habit in India generally. You want to meet whoever is in charge of the institution or organization rather than the person who is directly responsible for that. Mm-hmm. Anyways, I said, okay, if he insists on seeing me, what I suggest is bring him to see me, and 10 minutes later, you come and invite him and take him to meet this other person, which really, by then I would have told him what it is, and you take him and, to see this other person. So I had this conversation with this guy for 10 minutes, went on for 15 minutes, went on for 20 minutes, went on for 30 minutes. My PA did not come back to me to get this guy to go and see the other person. So I decided to step out. I told this guy, excuse me. I stepped out and asked, what happened? I told you to take him away after 10 minutes because I've got other things to be done, and this is not my area of responsibility, and somebody else can handle this better. You see, sir, I would have taken him, but the door to go to the other side is locked from the other side, therefore I cannot take him. So I called the office boy to come and open the door, and he has not turned up. I said, oh, is that the problem? I'll solve it for you now. I walked down across, I went the other side, opened the door, and I said, look, it's done now. So can you please take him now and to see this other guy? You see this hierarchy of things, that there has got to be an office boy, that has got to be a maid, and the how you treat people is very diverse. We are working in the context of India. Like, for example, the caste system established a certain hierarchy. Of course, they've done away with the caste system officially, but it continues to exist in various other forms, you know what I mean? And therefore, yes, the changing the society is very important. And India is a very complex society. I mean, we are all Indians, but there are so many quirks, and we are talking not 150 or 200 million people. We're talking 1.3 billion people, a humongous number of people. I'll tell you, I don't know whether it's a good joke to say, but I'll say it all the same. I'll take the risk, so don't feel offended, please. When I first came, actually, I came to India on a sabbatical to the Indian Institute of Management. And then I decided to, after that, I said, I'll go back to Australia. But then these guys headhunted me, so that's how I came here. But my first experience, the Indian Institute of Management, was a shocker to me. I came in, I presented a seminar for them, and they asked me, one of the guys asked me, Professor, how old are you? I was thunderstruck because the background from which I come, you never ask a person what his age is, whether he's married, etc. So I told him my age, and everybody was shocked. Having lived in Australia, they're quite loose with their mouth. I asked him, would you also like to know my sexual orientation? And everybody laughed, you know what I mean? When I was leaving the Indian Institute of Management, in my farewell talk, director mentioned this. I was shocked with Suku. This guy asked him about his age, and he told him his age, and he said, would you like to know more personal things about me? You see, they tend to, there is no personal and public space in India sometimes, you know what I mean? You go to a bank, for example, you will be doing something, the guy next door will come and peep into what you're doing. So it's quite different because we are a lot of people. Some of the problems are because there's so many of us. Therefore, to create those vast social changes is much more complex in India. The other country which has got a huge population is China, of course, but they enforce change. They decided on a one-child policy. It could be implemented. In India, you can't do that.
But nevertheless, the number of births in India are going down. And can you imagine that now in China, they proclaimed that it will be very nice for the families to have a third child, but nobody wants.
Yeah, and the same is true of Russia. I think Mr. Putin recently announced that he wants Russians to have at least 2 kids or whatever. You see, but this is social engineering through the state intervention. You know what I mean?
Yes, I agree with you.
In a place like India, because it's all dependent on, it's a multi-party system. Therefore, if you enforce certain things, it would become politically not popular, and therefore you could go out of the office, go out of office. They might not, like Mr. Shashi Tharoor, for example, is no more in parliament because his party lost the elections, right? So these changes happen in India, you know what I mean? Which probably is less prevalent in societies such as China.
Okay. So, guys,
have I answered your question, Nate?
Yes. Thank you so much. It was really interesting and fun as well. Thank you. Yeah.
Are anybody have questions or? Are somebody have questions to our guest? No. So, thank you very much. We are really impressed by the topic. For me, it's really very close because after United States, I pretended to be a feminist, but maybe not so active as in United States. But thank you very much, Suku. It was very, very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, in research, there will be many different perspectives. That's inevitable.
Okay. But I lived in India for about 10 years, so I'm understanding, I'm really understood what you're talking about. And I know the real position of Indian women. And it's really not easy. But from my point of view, changes are coming, and it will be more quick and more quick than we can imagine. Look at China.
Olga, you lived in here, you say. Are you familiar with a process called karva chauth? Have you heard that? Have you heard the word karva chauth?
No, sorry. What do you mean?
Once a year, the Indian wives do a ceremony, like pray and offer.
Yes, I know.
They fast. So even though of Indian ancestry, to me this was a shocker when I first came here, because my female staff, they said we got to go back early today because it's Karva Chauth. We have been fasting. We got to go back and sort of pray to the husband, etc. I said, "Wow, this is fascinating. Does he do this for you as well?" I said, "No." I said, "It's a very one-sided approach to life, isn't it?" So you see, the place of it is very entrenched. So when you say that it happens in Russia or in the United States, wherever it can happen, but in India, it's much more prevalent, especially for me as a person of Indian ancestry. When I observe this, gee, this is very, very entrenched. This divisions of gender is very strong, but it is changing. If you wait for the change to happen naturally, I think it's going to take a very long time. Therefore, I think my own thought is that there should be some level of state intervention, at least to provide incentives to do certain things. Provide incentives, for example, to have just one child. Whereas in China or in Russia, perhaps you provide them incentives to have more than one child. You just do the opposite of what these people are doing. Because incentives sometimes can have impact as well.
But nevertheless, I think I'm staying on my position. The changes are coming, and they're really, really, very, really quick. In one generation, it will be different country, because India now, the country, it's a part of the world industrialization. So world is global. And the changes are coming really quick. Yes. We will see.
I would say, I hope.
Thank you very much. For me, it was really very interesting to talk with you. I really enjoyed this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.